Well, again, good morning, class. It is Monday, May 15th. This is the next video session. Again, the video session as well as my hours, my office hours, if you will. So I'm going to get into our two chapters quickly. And before I do, there are a couple of reminders. Number one is that the expectation is that you will watch this video to learn what some of the critical things that are associated with the chapters. A second is that it gives you the opportunity to identify some critical areas that you can email me during your overall course. The third is the need to answer the hidden questions that are in the video, which will go towards your overall participation grade. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the chapters. Okay, as I stated before last week, and as I've stated in the messages, that if you are a participant in the video session, you do not have to answer the hidden questions. Okay, so one more thing before I get started, I have looked at the grade books, and a few of you have not even answered threaded lesson 2's threaded discussions, which already puts you behind. Okay, so we're in week 3. So the critical things in here, as we've talked about in the past, is you're trying to understand what is the environment related to the overall strategic planning, the strategic aspects of a business. And to that, one of the areas certainly is the global environment. Obviously, you have your own internal mission, you have your own internal vision. You're trying to have a company that is sustainable and profitable. And when we refer to its growth in today's environment, we look for the global environment. So what is the decision to go global? What are the orientations necessary, the complexities associated with it? The major issues, obviously, the sub-market, understanding market and competitive edges, globalization. You know, how do you go throughout the world to enable a firm to optimize business functions? Now, we keep talking global, but one aspect of this simply is how do you grow? You don't go from being a small one-person startup company, 5 people, whatever it might be, and then instantaneously become a international factor. You know, again, General Electric, Lockheed Martin, any of the multinational banks, stock firms, et cetera, et cetera. There is a methodology to approach that helps you to grow and to then become globalized. Okay. So it's understanding what the opportunities are, understanding the nuances. So you have to have the 4 levels, the minimal effect on your management operation, little change in operation, it's characterized by certain investments, and the most involved direct level is the substantial increase in foreign investments with foreign assets. Okay. Fine, here is a chart on growth you know, by economies. Why? Reap benefits from industrialization, penetration for markets, various, to take a concern about it. What is the lost opportunity? So here we have this nice question, should firms be proactive or reactive? Now, before you even move, I think it's fairly intuitive to people that what you want to do is to always move from being reactive into a proactive state. That's fairly straightforward, and we understand. You know, if you're constantly reactive, you're behind the 8 ball, you're not leading, you're not able to address or anticipate problems, which is about strategic analysis and strategic marketing. Okay, so the reasons for it, okay, you got this ethnocentric orientation. Okay, you're looking at the values of the parent organization, so how does it drive towards what you're trying to do? We'll get into these in a little more detail. Polycentric, it's the culture of the country to which the strategy is implemented. I'm not an expert on cultures across the world. However, I think you can understand and recognize the Western culture is different from an Eastern culture, Asian countries, as well as from, say, the Middle Eastern countries. Okay, they have different cultures, different beliefs, even acceptance of something as silly as you know, smoking habits these days. In a lot of Asian countries, smoking is still very widely accepted. Okay, and in the United States, as you can tell, smoking is almost a pariah. Regionocentric. So now when you start going down and you're in a country, you have to understand depending upon the country itself, what are some of the specific subsections or subcultures that are in it. And here they call it simply the predisposition. So when you're trying to understand in terms of globalization, again, you've started from a certain area, wherever that area might be. In the United States, the Northeast has a culture, the Southeast has a culture, et cetera, et cetera. And you take and move that culture, the way that your organization is operating. And what they're trying to basically say across these 4 areas, the geocentric, of course, being the last, is you're trying to recognize what will it take for you to be successful. And again, successful is often simply refined and defined as being viable. Okay, viable can include, profitable or sustainable and things of this nature. But you understand that what you're trying to do is to move into this area. An example that happened a few years ago was from here in the United States. The company Starbucks is well known throughout the entire United States, and frankly, it's almost a global concept too. Starbucks tried to open a series of shops in the Middle East, Israel specifically, several years ago, and it failed. And some of the reasoning simply were because of a lack of market depth analysis and who are the major competitions. People didn't disagree that Starbucks is good coffee, but they were coming in against the culture that was a different environment. And I understand recently that it was revisited, and the approach was far more amenable to the cultural impacts that were found in that time. So there are 5 factors, we understand it, and you can read these. There are multiple: political, economic, legal, social, cultural. Okay, you understand the national and foreign environments are complex, and there's the interactions, the separation of geographics simply enough is enough to understand that there's complexity in this type of work. The global face of extreme competition. Okay, so my first question before we get into the global problems of this firm is that each of you is to look at the article that's in the web shell called SOAR, and in one sentence tell me what SOAR is about. That's your first question. So what are the control problems of the global firm? Okay, control and understanding here, you can read these obviously, but control, the cartoon here is probably the best visualization of it. What does it take? What do you have to understand in order to be successful? Remember to keep the idea of success as the driver behind here. And while you can talk about success to you is making money, and that's okay, making profit, I should say, will be a little more correct here. How do you do it? What are the other actions? And this is where this particular chapter on the global aspect is trying to understand. The financial policies are designed to further the goals of the parent company, pay minimal attention to the goals of the host country. Okay, that's a straightforward statement. But the impact of that statement is what you need to understand and try and define. Whether or not, sticking with coffee as a moment, whether or not you have to maximize the cost of a cup of coffee here in the United States, what you're trying to do is to understand, well, what does it take to move this coffee recipe? The creation, as they say, every coffee maker in Starbucks is a barista, okay? And they are, again, artists in the creation of their coffees, okay? So does that fact move over and create financial hardships when you're in another country, okay? Having a coffee break may be truly considered a social environment where you actually take time and you sit down. In a lot of cases here in the United States, we rush in, we get coffee, and we go back to our desk and we continue to do work, as opposed to making it a social event. So how would that impact across the financial, What are the financial environments, okay, for company behavior? Do you pay differently? Do you structure things differently? What is the rate and scale of these issues that go forth? So you're not just talking about this end product as I've hit so far in terms of coffee making. You're talking about, what are the financial issues from the holistic perspective again? And that can include and needs to be recognized that you're talking about all of your reporting requirements. And again, the third one, you have different measurements, okay? And then finally, the problems can be reduced through more attention to strategic planning. That's the ultimate goal in this particular slide. The fact that you can address all of these, as well as the subsequent ones we're going to talk about, through attention to strategic planning. Now, before I move on with this, we're going to stop and talk a little bit about what is this attention to strategic planning. We mentioned it in the previous chapters. We've talked a little bit about the significance of it. We've identified certain characteristics. Even some of our earlier slides here talk about the strategic orientation, which gives you an idea of what they have to look at. Okay, they give you reasons for global. Well, let's flip this around to say, in order to be global, you have to strategically analyze what resources are there, what additional costs are there, what are the incentives, why are you doing this, new expanded markets, exploitation. Everything that comes into play is part of what the strategic analysis has to do with achieving a successful globalization. So the second question was simply, did I go back several slides? Yes or no? So we talk again, stakeholder activism, okay? What kind of role and impact do your stakeholders need to play in this? Is it viable to them? Do they see it? Now, again, if we think in terms of generalized size, if you're a small corporation, you're not really run through, say, a public environment such as the stakeholders. Okay, you're not public. Okay, you may not have stakeholders. Okay, but as you are growing and eventually you become a publicly traded organization, you do have your stakeholders. But even so, if I come back and just recant my statement just a little bit, okay, when you have a small company, you're the owners, you have a stake, you are a stakeholder, and you still must be active. So let's talk about something that's a mid-sized company, somewhere in the vicinity of, say, 100 employees, okay? And you have a marketing section, and they're looking at some level of expansion. They found a niche that will work in a, say, local country, meaning Canada or Mexico, okay? And you're looking to break into that market. As a mid-sized company, you as the owner, president, CEO, or board director, okay, if you're not even publicly traded, let's just say that you're the CEO owner, how active are you now when you start moving into this new environment? Okay, so we simply go forward onto this strategic planning. Okay, again, very, very intuitive in nature. There are increased complex decision. You have multi-domestic versus global concerns. And again, it gives you some definitions, and I'll come back to this growth aspect again, is that a successful global company has first gone through a successful domestic growth, regional growth, or national growth, if you will. So you can already start to learn about some of these and take those lessons learned and move them into, your standards for moving into the global. Again, simply a global industry crosses the national borders. Okay. We'll go through, we're simply here is what is multi-domestic, preferences of local customers. Again, this is something you can learn to grow with. As I say, sticking within the United States, the cultures across the Northeast, from the Southeast, or from the Deep South, they vary in multiple different ways, okay, let alone if we try and stick with coffee. But attitudes, behaviors, expectations of social conventions change. And by understanding as you grow in this first multi-domestic arena will help you to recognize in your strategic planning the potential impact and therefore the need to study what are the potential local customs that are both pro your expansion as well as against, or would be a burden and overcome, a hurdle to overcome. Again, fragmentation, economic scales, okay, distribution channels are unique. Now they're talking about in each country, and I'm still talking about within the United States. You know, depending upon where you are growing to, do you have the necessary transportation hubs? Will you send your product via air? Do you send it via rail? Do you send it via ground? Do you send it via water? Do you send it all different ways? Okay, and then again, expand that into understanding. You know, when you leave North America, which you might be able to avoid a water transit, but when you start talking international, you have to also incorporate what kind of overseas shipping will you do, and depending upon the size and the tonnage of what you're doing, is water versus air the better value? And yet maybe perhaps you need to have the mix due to certain just-in-time considerations. Okay. The final one down here is your low technological dependence on subsidies on R&D. Okay. In other words, when you do become initially into the global market, do you need to rely on heavy new technology as well as research and development? I want you to think about that one for a moment and try and picture in your own minds what would be the impact of moving to another country, where what you want to set up and sell in that country is a state-of-the-art piece of technology. So you're highly dependent upon being able to be successful in building the laboratories that are associated with it. And while you're building this new state-of-the-art, moving it from state-of-the-art to state-of-the-market technology, you're also simultaneously trying to identify, does it have a market to purchase there? Does it make sense then to put that with that type of a management, strategic management function, versus taking advantage of finding a friendlier research environment with the intent of selling back in your home country? Okay. So again, multi-domestic and this representation about low technological dependence of the subsidiaries, is an area that is often forgotten when you start thinking about manufacturing of large or highly technical things, again, and the issues that may go with them. And here's the example. The development of state-of-the-art, highly complex computer chips. Okay, certainly everybody intuitively knows and understands what you've heard the term a clean room, because of the sensitivity to small particles of dust, and I am talking extremely small, now 1 times 10 to the minus 20th size, something smaller than a hair. Okay, can destroy the functionality of some of these complex microchips. Having a factory to build them overseas may be economically the best, but in institutionalizing the culture of this very, very strict clean room environment may be difficult to an organization or a country that collectively doesn't understand it, and therefore you run the risk of a high failure rate of the chips once they're built. So how much failure can you tolerate? In other words, lost product versus the offset of a lower cost. And again, now we move into a global, and there were 6 reasons. The increased scope is what they meant. You have global competition, information explosion, global, again, competition, again, is restated. Development of technology and management, strategic management breeds managerial confidence. Sorry. So they're trying to talk about here is what is a global industry? And they're just merely saying that when you have a global industry, these are the 6 areas that you are focusing on from your business perspective. You're understanding information explosion. How does it affect you? How can you utilize it? You're understanding and recognizing and working the global competition aspect of it. Have you found new markets to sell your product? Okay, what's the competition there? Okay, it was an interesting thing to find out that in Somalia, they have a very, very high number of Japanese cars, Toyotas and things of this nature. How did they go from being in Asia, Japan, and having and identifying such a need in the sub-Saharan, as an example? So, you found a niche, you're there, you're able to sell and yet still make profit. What are all of the issues that go with that entire supply chain? Several factors. We won't waste our time reading them again. I expect you to read them. And here's the next question. Did you read these? Yes or no? And tell me, add to that yes or no question that there are 6, you have to state, there are 6 factors. More examples. Market requirements. Here again, I'm not going to go over anything that isn't intuitive. You have to look at your market, you have to understand the product characteristics, and then again tie them to where you're selling and who you want to sell it to. Okay. So this is again a nice little chart that really pulls all of these issues together when you talk about your products that you're moving there. Okay, because you look at the standardized markets, you look at the customized markets, and you look at the rate of change. And then you can see where things will come into play. So again, we had the maintained differentiation of computer chips as the one example. Firms are attempting to move towards globalization based upon the degree of complexity of the different markets. Okay, complexity is the number of critical success factors. Okay, straightforward. Diversity, the second variable, the breadth of the business line. Here it really is the chart that will give you an introduction into what it actually means. Okay. The competitive strategies, next niche, niche market exporting, joint ventures, foreign branching, acquisitions, wholly owned subsidiaries, and then the final key terms for this particular chapter. So as I move into the next chapter, we now revert back to the internal analysis that needs to be done. Before we move into this, again, as a recap, we've talked again over the term, we've set the foundations of what is strategic management, how is it important to our business, the need for an appropriate mission statement, vision statement, how are we going to grow, where are we going to grow? We've looked at one of the things that the concern is in terms of we move towards globalization. And yes, what is the global environment? Okay, so now you understand the complexities, the problems, the things that you need to look at in order to move into this global world. Before you do that, how do you conduct your own analysis? What do I do to determine, am I ready? Should I? How would I? Usually it's referred to as the how, when, where, and why type of an analysis to determine what is the best to help with the strategic management, which then moves from the analysis and eventually into the, okay, so what is the actual implementation strategy and how is the execution of that performed? What is a SWOT analysis? Value chain analysis, resource, understanding different perspectives, and familiarizing, ratio analysis. Okay, I'm pretty sure that throughout your courses here, you've seen or been exposed to SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Find it's a historically popular technique. Okay, and again, the SWOT analysis basically has 2 sides to it. What are the opportunities? What are the threats against it? Okay, what are my weaknesses? And what are the strengths? So they're almost polar opposites. When you look at strengths, what are your weaknesses? When you look at opportunities, what are the threats? Okay, so they're balanced so that you look back and forth. Okay. These are just simply the definitions. You can see, again, an example of it, and the limitations. What they mean here by limitations to me is what you need to be concerned about is that you don't, or you bias one way or the other. And yes, you can bias on the positive sides, one of my strengths and one of my opportunities, and then subconsciously diminish the weaknesses and threats of your own corporation. Or you can overemphasize your weaknesses and threats and not recognize the strengths and the opportunities. Okay. They also say here that it can be static and the risk of ignoring changing things. Okay, technology and information technology is probably the simplest example to come with right now. The speed of change of IT. Okay, as I say, it can overemphasize one or the other. Okay, the value chain, find a chain of activities that transforms inputs into outputs. Operations management is what comes to mind here. Remember, everything that you do in your business. Okay, strategic management class here, this part of the capstone puts it together. But as a business, you're looking for taking inputs, raw materials, whatever it might be, conducting some kind of transformation that relates them into a output that is creates value for the corporation. That could be a hard product, material-based, or non-material-based in the case of, say, research, analysis and things of this nature. Simply, value chain analysis understands how the business creates customer value. Okay. Value chain analysis divides, disaggregates the business into a set of activities. Okay, there are primary and support. You can read what primaries are, the physical creation, the support that go around it. Okay, so in the case of creating a widget, the favorite term, the primary activities would be the actual plant, the raw materials, the labor that goes into actually translating or transforming the product, the materials. Let me use a house as an example. The primary activities would be the purchasing of the labor itself, the carpenters, plumbers, electricians that go into actually building the house. The support activities were all the infrastructure. So that would be, in this case, the purchases to ensure that the lumber, the piping, the wire has been purchased on time to meet the schedules, as well as the pay offices to ensure that the contractors or subcontractors are paid to ensure that these things move along in a smooth fashion. Okay. Again, just merely explains what I've talked about in more detail. So here you go with some more primary activities, okay? And the support ones, the general administration, the HR management, RDT&E, the procurement activities, okay? And then you need to conduct one, all right? The traditional cost accounting versus activity-based accounting. I believe you've all had an accounting system, so I'll let you understand how traditional versus activity, and you can see it simply is how you aggregate the different sections and segments. Okay. So there are some difficulties, or more likely the word I would use is there are more issues you need to be aware of and assured of that you address appropriately. Three circles analysis, fine, we'll get right there. Company's offerings, the company's needs, and the competitor's offerings. And this is what's referred to as a Venn diagram. So that's your last question for today, is what is a Venn diagram and at what page? And the answer would be 6-20. Did you see the Venn diagram? How big and sustainable is Circle A? What are we delivering effectively, and how can we counter competitors' advantage? Resource-based view, it's going to be the similar type of analysis. You're looking for tangible, resources, hard things that can be found on the balance sheet. Again, for my house example, it's the wood, it's the pipe, the piping, the wire, the furniture, the kitchen sink. Okay, the intangible assets or the resources, brand name. You know, have you bought something that is recognized as good quality? The reputation of your own company as well as others. Okay. Your knowledge, you know, so again, when you talk about the value of the corporation, and I think the easiest way to put this together is, you know, we've seen a growth of organizations such as Angie's Lists or Home Advisor, which has a listing of resources, be they plumbers, electricians, roofers, handyman, whatever it might be, and there's a reputation of them, you know, on time, quality, finished well, did everything, you know, cleaned up afterwards, whatever it might be. Okay, all of these types of things tie into understanding and help you select the right type of resource. Okay, and then organizational capabilities and the skills. Okay, so when we think again in a large organization, okay, what they have there is to recognize a firm's efficacy. At the higher end is the organization built around supporting getting the product and delivered on time as ordered in a cost-effective manner. Okay. Just understanding what makes it something valuable. Elements of scarcity. Okay, short supply, availability, substitutes, etc. Isolating mechanisms. You know, path-dependent resources. If you're building something that entails Ferraris, and I don't remember which model it is, but Ferrari hand builds one particular model, and they only build about 12 to 16 years, as my memory serves. And so it's a scarcity, short of supply and scarcity. Okay, physically unique resources. Now they may not have physically unique materials. You know, an engine's made out of, you know, metal, and the cylinder is built in a certain way, but it's independent, physically unique in that it's a set of very, very small set of mechanics that are qualified and authorized to do these hand-built cars. Very path-dependent, causal ambiguity, and economic deterrence, okay, would be reasons for them. It helps again with this disaggregate resources. You utilize the RBV in internal analysis to understand what's the best way to go about doing this. Okay? So then applying the resource view. Now remember we had the 3 circles, okay, originally, and they had placed them in pretty much a equal standard. But the idea here is that when you come back to that 3-circle analysis, eventually, and I'm going to go back and show you. Okay, what you want to do is you want to make certain that your company offerings are maximized against the company's needs, minimizing the competitors' offerings. Okay, and this is what this is trying to show, is as you've moved these 3 circles around. Okay, this is applying it actually to the resource basis view, but when you move them around to maximize the capabilities to meet customer needs, okay, you will actually meet and exceed, helping to diminish the competitors' offerings, putting you in a better competitive state. The other thing that this summarizes all back down to is making meaningful comparisons. As I started off with the SWOT analysis, one of the things that has to be thought of and reviewed is understanding that you may be biased towards, you know, overselling the strengths and weaknesses, or overselling the the strength and opportunities, or overselling the weaknesses and the threats. Okay, which then on the flip side would diminish the counters to it. One way around that is called benchmarking. Now, one thing is benchmarking. People need to understand a benchmark is neither right nor wrong. Okay, as it states there, and I'm going to read this because I think it's critical to understand it. Benchmarking, or comparing the way our company performs an activity with a competitor or other company doing the same thing, has become a central concern of managers and quality commitment companies worldwide. But the thing is that benchmarking is simply how is something done or how you are doing it. It is neither right nor wrong. It is merely how you do. Once you have established, reviewed, determined how you build something, sell something, make something, market something, operate your processes within your organization, whatever it might be, then you can then determine if you need to improve as well as how to improve, or issues to avoid to prevent you from slipping and doing things less efficiently. Okay? So a benchmark is the initial stage to determine performance as well as quality. The key determinants of success in an industry may be used to identify their internal strengths and weaknesses. A strategist seeks to determine whether their internal capabilities represent strengths or weaknesses. Fine. And these are the last key terms. All right. So before I finalize for this week, as a reminder, one other thing that the class needs to do is you do have a final paper that is due at the end of this course. Now, the course shell says, no, you do not have a research proposal due. That is correct. You do not have a research proposal. However, you have a term paper. And again, we call it a capstone paper. And again, that is defined as being anywhere from 25 to 40 pages long. I strongly recommend and urge each of you to have come up with a topic and start sending some information to me rather than waiting till week 7 and then submitting a 40-page paper that I read and does not meet the capstone requirements. You must go back, as one of my questions was, you must go back and read that capstone Word file and then start addressing that. I'll send out another message to reiterate this. Until then, since no one attended the recording, everyone is expected to answer my hidden questions. I will talk to everyone next Monday.